This conference will now be recorded.
I'll just make two housekeeping announcements while Abby sets up her first slide. If you're joining us by phone, you can mute and unmute yourself with *6, as I understand it. And after Abby's presentation, which will run about 20 minutes, there'll be 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A by the public. We committee members who have joined Abby this morning, Dr. Larry Nesper and Ms. Lacey Hill-Castern, we will hold our questions until the closed door defense part. So the question and answer session is very much for the public and friends and family to ask Abby questions you might have. Take it away, Abby.
Thank you. Buju in Denawe Meganog, in Donjaba Beisho in Wewi Gichigami, in Da Beisho Anishinaabe Gichigami, Abby Fergus, Indigenous Cause. I just introduced myself in Anishinaabe Moan, the language of Anishinaabe or Ojibwe people whose land I live and study on. I said, hello friends, I come from Lake Michigan and I now live on Lake Superior. My name is Abby Fergus. Today, I'm excited to present on the gold standard carnivore deterrent research I conducted in the summer of 2019 and to talk about the need for wildlife professionals to do relationship building with tribes and livestock farmers. I'm a master's candidate with the Carnivore Coexistence Lab, as Adrian shared, and in my studies, I've specialized in the gray wolf in particular, studying gray wolf behavior, ecology, and the law, including indigenous law that surrounds the gray wolf. Through my master's research specifically, I explored the effectiveness of non-lethal deterrence in helping livestock farmers to coexist with all native carnivores on the Anishinaabe 1842 ceded territory, now known as Northern Wisconsin. I began working with the Mosh-Kazibbe Natural Resources Department, or MNRD, 3 years ago when I served as an intern to help update the Mosh-Kazibbe Mayingan, or gray wolf, relationship plan. Since that time, I worked as wildlife technician in 2018 for the tribe. I started graduate school, as Adrian said, in 2019. And then I got hired as the tribe's wildlife specialist July 2019. So the past year and a half, I've been both working as the wildlife specialist and pursuing my master's education. Human-wildlife conflict is a rising concern across the globe as many carnivores return to landscapes from which they were once extirpated, and as humans adapt to the return of carnivores, including the gray wolf. Human populations and the spread of agriculture have also increased over time and are acting as the greatest cause of carnivore decline in many cases. There's also a lack of well-designed, statistically rigorous experiments to test the effectiveness and relatedly to explore feasibility and ethics behind either non-lethal or lethal options. And in the North American model of wildlife conservation, lethal action is often the default. Here in this picture, you can see a coyote in what ended up to be an unsuccessful pursuit of a white-tailed deer. And this occurred shortly before the setup of our experiment in one of the participating farms. The Bad River Reservation expands across 124,459 acres of mostly undeveloped boreal and temperate forests and wetlands. Depicted in this map created by Lacey Hill-Castern is the Bad River Reservation and the Mayingan Buffer Zone, which is outlined in the Mosh-Kazibbe-Mayingan Relationship Plan and shown here with the red line. It extends about 6 miles out from the reservation boundaries in order to adequately protect reservation Mayinganog, because wolves and other animals don't regard our political boundaries. The Mashkezibi-Maingan relationship plan bans the hunting of Mainganog on the reservation or within this buffer zone, and the plan outlines how the Bad River tribe is to have co-management authority over Maingan with the state of Wisconsin within this buffer zone when wolves are federally delisted. In order to do relationship building with livestock owners within and around the Maingan Plan buffer zone, the Bad River Tribal Council initiated this collaborative study with the Carnivore Coexistence Lab to test the effectiveness of non-lethal deterrence in improving carnivore coexistence on farms. You can see on the map that reservation Mainganog were killed during hunts that occurred in the early 2010s when Maingan was delisted in the Great Lakes. These Maingan deaths happened because the Wisconsin DNR did not honor the tribe's assertion of this buffer zone. 6 Bad River Mainganog were killed in 2013 hunts, and 2 were killed in 2012 hunts, as denoted by the orange triangles and the green circles. For our field research, I identified wildlife corridors that led up to pasture using aerial photos, farmer knowledge, and ground surveys. And I established these as the non-lethal treatment areas. Controls.
Hello?
I'm going to pause for a second.
Abby, I'll go ahead and mute all if you wish, and you can just keep going.
Okay.
Hello?
Yeah. I'm going to restart this slide. For our field research, I identified wildlife corridors that led up to the pasture using aerial photos, farmer knowledge, and ground surveys, and established these as the non-lethal deterrent treatment areas. They're the locations where we deployed Fladry, fox, and their placebo controls, depending on the experimental. In this picture, there is a line of Fladry with a yellow fox light above the line of Fladry in the background of the image.
I don't understand what he's saying though.
According to the manufacturing company, fox lights are deterrents that flash 2 colors of LED light at 360 degrees and that can be seen from up to 1 kilometer away. We constructed Fladry using materials commonly available in farmer supply stores: polywire, plastic step-in posts, and flagging tape. For research setup, I was supported by 2 to 3 field crew members from the Wisconsin Tribal Conservation Advisory Council or from MNRD. We hung the polywire from step-in posts to create
come up my butt. I want it.
of Fladry across wildlife corridors. The crew assembled the Fladry in the field by hand tying pre-cut strips of flagging tape at 10 centimeters apart. Fladry was originally used in Europe to corral and hunt wolves. Most Fladry studies have tested wider spacing of flags, but we reduced the gap to 10 centimeters between flags, which is the average width of a coyote skull, with the intention to improve the effectiveness of Fladry against coyotes as opposed to previous studies. We ensured that only a few centimeters of space existed between the bottom of the Fladry line and the earth to avoid the potential of animals crawling beneath the setup. Fox lights were installed above the top of Fladry lines. When a treatment area was in the control phase, we removed the fox light battery to serve as a placebo control for the active fox lights. And to create a placebo control for Fladry, we bunched up and tied off the flags. Bias may be introduced into research throughout the process, from hypothesis forming to what findings get published. Treves et al. 2019 categorized 5 common types of bias found in wildlife research. We avoided sampling bias by randomly assigning the sequence of treatment and control for each farm. We avoided treatment bias by spending roughly the same amount of time on research setup at each farm. We didn't find it feasible to employ blinding because deterrents are very conspicuous, so we couldn't avoid this potential source of measurement bias. We avoided reporting bias by transparently describing the reason behind any data exclusion. And for controlling reporting bias, we didn't find it feasible to submit a register report in which we present the methodology but not the results, to try to avoid that form of bias that occurs with journals at some times. Oops. So true objectivity does not really exist, and that makes it important for us to transparently discuss and reflect on our potential sources for bias and learn from any mistakes. So I shared this picture of a cub because it reflects one of the many lessons I learned in conducting this study. I should have used the video setting of these trail cameras instead of a picture, because now I don't know if this cub just didn't care about the 120 decibel noise that this critter getter is supposed to make, or if the deterrent was potentially not working. In addition to the controls against bias I have detailed, ours was a crossover experiment in which all farms were subjected to both treatment and control periods. Thus, we categorized our research as gold standard. Our study had a small sample size. Recruiting farmers was difficult, and I attribute this to the clear distrust many farmers had towards government scientists based on some negative past experiences. Additionally, we eliminated one entire farm from the data analysis because cattle chewing on fladry and the fladry bunching in the wind caused consistent problems across all study areas. In the picture, some curious cattle are chewing and trampling fladry. The picture also shows the dense vegetation on the outside of the fenced pasture, and that rendered it impossible to run the fladry on the outside of the pasture and thus keep it out of curious bovine mouths. We followed a similar conservative approach in data analysis to Orens et al. 2019. We took a conservative approach by pooling each of the 2 to 3 treatment areas per farm to analyze data on a farm-wide scale. We tested for period effects and for carryover effects. We found our small sample of data to be non-normal, so we employed the non-parametric Wilcoxon rank sum to test for differences in carnivore occurrences between the treatment and the control periods and over time. To test for the effect of foxlights and fladry on carnivore occurrences, we also used the Hills-Armitage ANOVA procedure. We confirmed 8 occurrences of coyote visits and 4 occurrences of black bear visits during the research period using trail camera data. We did not detect period or carryover effects. The occurrence of carnivores did not vary significantly between treatment and control periods. During treatment periods, farms experienced a total of 1 carnivore occurrence, compared to 11 occurrences during the placebo control periods when the deterrents were not activated. So the foxlights at that time did not have the batteries and the fladry was tied up. to serve as placebo controls. So despite this insignificant result, the direction of deterrent effects depicted in the figure suggests that need for further testing with larger samples. The figure shows the direction of effects. The blue line signifies farms that received a treatment and then a control, and the blue line shows an increase in carnivore occurrences from treatment to control. The red line signifies farms that received control and then treatment, and shows a slight decrease in carnivore occurrences from control to treatment. Also, something interesting to note is these pictures. So the one where Fladry is visible, taken in August, shows that there was a coyote. That's the one occurrence of coyotes during a treatment period. But it's interesting to then see the coyotes in the presence of the Fladry, the coyotes not actually crossing the Fladry. It's climbing the slope, and then later in the same location, but after the study, there's a coyote walking almost the same exact line of the Fladry. So this kind of demonstrates how there's still room for interpretation and how more data is needed. So again, I consider this a pilot study that should be replicated with a larger sample size, which is very possible because in my study area, there's a growing movement of regenerative farmers who are interested in coexisting with carnivores while producing food. Additional studies should also explore the use of livestock guardian dogs and donkeys that are employed in my study area to prevent predation on livestock. I hope to start up a collaborative carnivore tracking program on farms to increase human presence around livestock and to build knowledge of how carnivores are using farmland. I will also continue lending deterrents, trail cameras, and offering carnivore coexistence consultation through the Mashkazibby Wildlife Program. Conducting carnivore coexistence research is only part of the puzzle. Relationship building is essential to human-wildlife conflict, since these issues often arise from human activity. I will end by discussing the importance of and approaches to wildlife professionals doing relationship building with tribes and with livestock farmers. Climate chaos and biodiversity loss are tied with Indigenous culture and language loss, because Indigenous language and cultures are shaped by and embedded with ecological understanding. Anishinaabe scholar Robin Wall-Kimmerer has pointed out how the Earth's remaining biodiverse places overlap with where Indigenous peoples continue to steward their native homes. Undervaluing and excluding tribes continues 500 years into the colonization of Turtle Island, now known as North America. White Earth elder Zashigid Nuding, Bob Shimmick, and Glyphwick wolf biologist Peter David were each involved in the formation of the Minnesota and the Wisconsin wolf conservation plans in 2001 and 1999 when these plans were published. Bob and Peter often teach about how tribal sovereignty has not been adequately honored by Great Lakes states in relation to Mayingan conservation. Tribes were not adequately involved in the formation of these state wolf plans. And as I discussed earlier, reservation Mayinganog were killed in state-conducted wolf hunts in the early 2010s. Ecosystems are healthier where Indigenous language and culture exists and is fostered. Modern restoration projects by Mashkazibby Natural Resources Department exemplify the continued presence and success of Anishinaabe stewardship on the landscape. Some of the many examples include the Piping Plover Restoration Project on Schwamigan Point, efforts to study and restore a Monoman wild rice in the Kakagan and Batterverse Sloughs, the collaborative restoration of Augusk sharp-tailed grouse in the Muckwa Barrens, and the community tracking of Reservation Mayinganog. Some of these projects have also entailed successful collaborations with state and federal agencies. Yet the Great Lakes states have yet to formally endorse co-management with tribes, according to Busion and Gilbert, 2009. And with the lack of this formal endorsement of co-management, it leaves questions today, as Great Lakes gray wolves were delisted on October 29, 2020, and as tribes seek better honoring of sovereignty and treaties by the state and federal governments than what has occurred in the past. The Bad River Tribal Council tasked the Mashkazibee Wildlife Program with hosting the 2020 Mashkazibee Mayingan Symposium ahead of the anticipated delisting of the gray wolf. On March 15, 2019, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service published its intention to delist the gray wolf and solicited public comment, as well as invited on 5 scientific reviewers for the proposal. In my conversations with other tribally employed wildlife professionals, I've confirmed that the Great Lakes tribes were not consulted regarding this delisting as is required by treaty rights. At the 2020 Mashkazibee Mayingan Symposium that began this year, Great Lakes tribes made clear the immemorial kinship between Mayingan and Anishinaabe, and the tribes made clear their opposition to delisting the wolf because their brother continues to be vulnerable to legal and illegal killing by humans. State and federal wildlife agency professionals were in attendance, and one even shared their experience of losing a dog companion to a territorial wolf it came across, and how attending the symposium was helping him to heal from that unfortunate loss and process that wolf was doing its job protecting its home. And there are these complicated situations we need to take on if we want successful carnivore coexistence. Another highlight from the symposium was the opportunity it brought for us to do some community brainstorming for new approaches that me and one of the farmers I work with can take to help protect her free-ranging poultry from a fox that has repeatedly taken some of her animals. At the symposium, we made Anishinaabe knowledge, sovereignty, and positions clear. And again, federal and state agency employees were one of the many groups that were able to join us for these research presentations, traditional storytelling and knowledge sharing, problem-solving breakout sessions, and really good food. People of diverse backgrounds were able to come together and discuss our varied relationship with Mayingan, and White Earth has plans to host the next Mayingan Symposium. Also, out of this gathering, the Great Lakes tribes have consistently began collaborating on creating a better future for our relationship and coexistence with Mayingan. So in conclusion, carnivore coexistence is going to require both sound experimentation and relationship building, and both sides of this coexistence approach are achievable for small natural resource agencies such as Mashkazibee Natural Resources Department. Future research is needed to replicate our gold standard crossover design with a larger sample size. And this also seems feasible, as I mentioned, that regenerative farming is a growing movement in this area. And to effectively address issues including carnivore coexistence, biodiversity loss, and climate chaos, wildlife professionals need to prioritize relationship building with land-based people, including farmers and tribal members. I have way too many people to adequately thank with one slide, but I just wanted to mention some of the many names of folks who have helped me come here to this point of defending my thesis. So thank you for giving me opportunities and knowledge to Chequamegon Bay farmers, the Bad River Tribe, Lacey, Adrian, and Larry, Megan, Will, and Xander. Thank you for helping me, allowing me to carry torches. Zashi Nuding, Edith Leoso, Peter David, Philomena Quebec, Scott Baywis, and thank you for helping me with my thesis in defense. Gimme Wan, Chris Arbuckle, Nathan, Naomi, Jessica, Andrew, Marissa, Paige, Christine, and Harmon. And I'm so sorry, but I need to step away and ask the people in the next room to stop doing their noise making. I will be right back. I'm really sorry.
This is Adrian Travis. Abby, thank you. Good job. I welcome anyone to unmute, and we'll have a minute of applause until Abby comes back. Folks, there will be 10 minutes of Q&A by the public as soon as Abby is back. I'm going to cut it just a little bit short. We thought we would have 15 minutes. We'll just have 10 minutes because we ran a little bit over. Again, if you are dialing into this meeting, you can unmute yourself with *6, and then please mute yourself again after asking your question by pressing *6 again. And I have asked Abby to choose choose the questioners as soon as she is back. Okay, Abby, I don't know if you heard our applause. I hope you did. I mentioned how to unmute. And go ahead and call on your questioners. I decided to limit it to 10 minutes, Abby, and your committee will drop off in 10. Thanks, good job.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Can you give us a brief description of regenerative farming that you've mentioned several times throughout your presentation?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in this area up on Lake Superior, there are a lot of people who are focused on agriculture that reduces the use of fossil fuels, kind of returns to some traditional practices, because I find that sometimes we get caught up in developing all this technology, and there's a long, complicated history I can't go all the way into in the United States of subsidies for equipment or growing cash crops influence agriculture a lot. But up here, there's this different cultural approach to farming where people want to make sure if they're keeping livestock, they're out on the landscape being moved across pasture regularly enough so they're not having negative impacts such as soil compaction, and instead they act more like wild ungulates, which we don't have so many anymore because of extirpation. But the way that healthy herds of animals like ungulates are supposed to work is in really good balance with the soil and helps actually sequester even more carbon than forests do if done properly. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, so I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't ask what about the birds, but I understand people have their biases. So, but I did wonder, in terms of the land use, how much of the agriculture is being done by the Anishinaabe and how much is done by white folk?
Yeah, okay. to address the first part of your comment, yes, I need to focus more on birds too, and avian predators are a very real threat when it comes more so to chickens, but I was even told by one of the sheep farmers they've had eagles go after lambs.
Sure.
So that's interesting, and I'm always trying to expand my knowledge of all of these potential carnivores. And then the other part, your question about who's doing the farming. In our area specifically, it's white people doing the farming. The tribe has a really beautiful food sovereignty program, but it's still growing. But it really depends where you are. Like I believe it's the Oneida have amazing cattle and bison grazing programs. And then I think Scott had a question.
If you had one ask of the Natural Resources Board, what would it be?
Any ask of the Wisconsin Natural Resource Board?
Yep.
I would ask them to learn from all the lessons that we have available from what occurred in the early 2010s, and honestly incorporate the public more so that it's not certain interest groups that are able to make these decisions for the wildlife in what's now known as Wisconsin, and to do so using both science and traditional ecological knowledge, but also ethics, because none of these decisions are just made scientifically. There's always value decisions behind them.
All right.
Thanks for that question. Any other questions?
Abby, this is Peter David. First of all, I just say I think this is really important work to be doing. You know, there's such an ongoing battle between the lethal versus non-lethal, and we need to spend the kind of effort and resources into looking into these non-lethals the way you're doing that, and it's such an important step to get us, I think, further down the line. That being said, do you think this isn't easy stuff to prove, to gather the right kind of data for, but just sort of your gut feel, do you think the bigger hindrance would be gathering good data and applying this at a large enough scale, or sort of making that bridge in relationships with farmers to get them to really embrace that kind of work down the line?
You're asking which is more difficult?
Right.
Okay. I think it depends on who you ask, and I've been having lots of conversations with people in this field who are a bit younger, along my age, and I feel like there's an interesting age dichotomy in this field, as certain people are nearing retirement, and then there's younger people who finally maybe have opportunity to get in the field. And I see, this is just based on my experiences, it's not empirical, but something that I feel I experience is some of the older generations really don't seem interested in doing that outreach. And there's this common argument that I got into wildlife to get away from humans. And I think probably a lot of us at least go through that phase at some point, but then when it comes down to it, humans are so often the common denominator in these issues. So it's not easy to do outreach and put yourself out there. It costs you energetically, emotionally, but in the end, it's really fulfilling. So I don't really find it hard anymore, but I can look back and remember all the anxiety. And just the personal growth I had to do to even be capable of that type of work. And then the research is also so demanding. I've been reflecting on just the physical demand of conducting this study, and it was intense, but I think both are really doable if we let more people into the field, because there are people who are eager to do this work, and if the funding and opportunities were lined up, I think there are a lot of people excited to do this, but it is definitely influenced by what funding's available.
Thank you. Interesting.
So I have some additional time to keep talking to folks while my committee transitions to our private session for me to give the rest of my defense, so I can keep talking for a little bit, and we'll let people know when I need to leave.
Hey, Abby, this is Lissa.
Hi, Lissa.
Hi, thanks so much for your great presentation this morning. I'm wondering if you were going to go for your PhD after you took a little rest and got back to just enjoying nature instead of studying it so intensively, what do you think you'd need to study to extend or continue your great work that you've done here?
That's a really good question. I definitely at least need a very long break. But something interesting that happened over the course of my master's is I realized personally, I think I would be categorized more as a geographer. And I just really didn't even know what a geographer was up until master's. And that's because a lot of what I do comes down to studying the human dimensions work. So I don't know if it's just what I would want to do or if it's what I need, but I have thought about if I went onto a PhD, like my dream lab would be go working with Robin Wall Kimmerer. I don't know how likely that is to happen, but I really recommend Braiding Sweetgrass and other of her work because she's really been my main teacher probably in how to draw from both scientific knowledge and indigenous knowledge, and that is what I see us needing to chart a better path forward in these wildlife and biodiversity issues.
Beautiful, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, clarifications?
Can you explain to us what the rest of your defense entails?
Yes, I am going to be talking with my committee for about an hour about my thesis and doing the same thing basically that I'm doing with you, but they're going to be asking the questions and probably grilling me a little bit more intensely.
And who is that besides Travis?
Lacey Hill-Castern, who was my original mentor up here. I came up here 3 years ago thanks to her to do that internship. And then Larry Nesper, who's an anthropologist, and some might have heard of his book on the Walleye Wars that explained in the 1980s how Anishinaabe tribes saw their treaty rights reaffirmed in the LCO versus Voight decision.
Okay, thank you.
Scott?
Did you run into any cougars, any mountain lions during your project?
That's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that. So I was never able to get trail camera pictures or find tracks, but in one of the farming communities I researched with, there were 2 instances by 2 different people within that community of reported mountain lion sightings. So the first time I heard about this, it was like a Friday night, and one of the farmers started texting me about it, and I stayed up sending her resources from states with established populations on how to just understand mountain lion behavior in the interest of protecting children, livestock. And then the next day, on Saturday, I went out to the community and just met with those farmers one-on-one and addressed any of their concerns, talked through things with them. And I looked around for sign, but in 2019, there was a long stretch where we didn't have any rain, and the soil up here is mostly clay. So it's very bad tracking conditions on top of looking for a cat. So I don't have personally any trail camera photos, but then towards the end of that summer up by Red Cliff, someone got a picture of a mountain lion with a dead coyote in its mouth, and that's 40 miles away from this farming community, which is well within the range of a single mountain lion. So mountain lion sightings aren't uncommon, but you can't always get your own evidence to affirm sightings. And that was a really big learning experience for me because, again, like my background is focusing on wolves. I didn't even anticipate mountain lions being a carnivore that was going to be encountered. So when something like that happens, I'm learning alongside the farmers, and it kind of just directs when and where I focus my studies so that I can help us all figure out some coexistence options.
Abby? So I was just curious, first of all, fantastic job. This has really been very enlightening. And what about smaller carnivores? How important do you think they are? Mustelids and so on, I'm thinking of primarily. Are like their impacts needing to be considered, or are they something that, you know, by and large are probably not having much of a economic pressure, so they can be, I want to say ignored, but I'm just curious.
Yeah. I came to learn over the course of this is I can kind of look at what kind of livestock the farmer's keeping, and that entails some clues of what your concerns are going to be. So mostly it's beef cattle, and for cattle, it would seem that the calves are the most vulnerable, and the type of predators that would go after a calf would be something like black bears, coyotes, wolves, mountain lions. But then people often are also keeping poultry, so everything wants to eat poultry, including mustelids, foxes. The farm I mentioned I needed to eliminate from the data analysis because of all the fladry challenges. Also had a reoccurring issue with a fox going after poultry, and that farmer lost $800 in one summer of poultry. And I just really admire her commitment to finding ways to come to an understanding with the carnivores that she shares the landscape with, because there's the potential when you kill one carnivore that another one's just going to come along. But that just kind of exemplifies the costs that farmers are facing alone for this, and I think they need and deserve a lot more support because they're feeding all of us, and it's not just their problem. So it really depends on the situation. And foxes are very good chicken carnivores.
Thanks.
Angie?
Do you have more time?
Yeah.
Social work or sociology question here. How did you, like, meet the farmers and develop relationships? Like, did you go knock on their door, or was there some sort of public forum, or how did that all come about, and how long did it take before you could feel really comfortable with them? Or maybe there's some that you're still not comfortable with, or they're not comfortable with you. Like, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, this is my last question, by the way, to answer before I need to switch over to my other call. So that's a really good question. And I wish I kind of shared more about that actually, because all this relationship building I'm talking about takes time. And I find in academia, we're often pushed to do things very quickly. But something that I had in my favor was that I joined the community up here before I started grad school. So I was already building the relationship with the tribe. But then starting in 2018, I also got to learn a lot about farming lifestyles, and that really helped me relate to these farmers. So like my background, I'm basically a city girl the way I grew up, and the most I could relate with farmers was that I started beekeeping while I was at Alma, and I could like understand that emotional connection you have with animals, and I tried using that to contextualize how it would feel to lose a calf, for example. But then I was making friends with farmers, and I learned how to milk cows and move them across pasture, and how much work it takes day in and day out to live this way. And that's really what helped bridge the gap, because I think it's like we're just conditioned to look at each other and pass judgment. So I don't, based on appearance, come across as a farmer in a lot of contexts. But when I was able to show that I really took their lifestyle seriously and really wanted to make a difference, I found farmers that were up for the work, because I could see how it would be a little bit of a sacrifice to just trust letting someone like me come on their land and work around their livestock. And yeah, it's not consistent across farmers. There's some farmers that are more excited about trying to figure out ways to coexist, and there's some farmers who are just not going to work with me, and that's okay. I have to log off now, but I just want to say thank you so much for all of your support and listening to my talk and asking great questions. And if you want to ask any more questions, you probably personally know me and know how to find me. But otherwise, I'll try to throw my email in the chat box real quick.
Congratulations, Abby.
Yeah, good job, Abby.
Wonderful job, Abby.
Good luck, yeah.
Great, Abby.
Take care.
Got it.
She's gone.